The lake had always been our sanctuary, a place of quiet retreat where the world's chaos faded into the gentle ripples of the water. But that peace shattered the moment we heard the loud, grating voice of a woman who had no business being there. "Oh, what a perfect spot. This will do just fine for us," she announced, her tone dripping with entitlement. My sister Lily and I exchanged confused glances as we watched her march onto our dock, her kids already tossing their bags onto the wooden planks as if they owned the place. The sight of them sprawling out on our private land, completely unbothered, sent a surge of anger through me. I stepped forward, clearing my throat. "Excuse me, ma'am. This is private property." The woman, mid-40s, perfectly manicured nails, sunglasses perched atop her blonde bob, turned to me with an exaggerated eye roll. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Water belongs to everyone. Don't be so dramatic. Love seeing entitled people get what they deserve. Subscribe for more crazy stories like this." I could barely believe what I was hearing. This wasn't a public park. This was my father's land, a piece of our family's legacy that had been cherished for decades. The woman, who I would later learn was named Karen, because of course she was, had already begun unpacking as if she planned to stay the whole day. Her 2 sons, both around 10 or 11, were already wading into the lake, kicking up water and screaming as they hurled sticks at each other. One of them climbed onto our old wooden canoe, rocking it violently while the other encouraged him to flip it over. "Ma'am, I don't know who you think owns this place, but it's not public," I repeated, my patience wearing thin. Karen barely spared me a glance. "Relax, dude. It's just water." I don't see any private property signs. Her husband, Greg, a heavy-set man with an expensive watch and an even more expensive attitude, strolled up beside her, folding his arms. "What's the problem here?" he asked, his tone as smug as his wife's. "The problem," I said through gritted teeth, "is that you're trespassing." Greg let out a condescending chuckle. "Oh, I see. You think you own this lake." I clenched my fists. "Actually, yeah. My dad owns this land, including the dock you're standing on. You need to leave." Instead of looking concerned, Greg only smirked, glancing back at Karen, who grinned like they were on some private joke. "Well," Karen drawled, "that's funny, because we actually know the real owner. And I don't think he'd mind us being here at all." Lily let out a short laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "What are you talking about? Our family has owned this lake for decades." Karen sighed dramatically, as if we were inconveniencing her by even questioning her presence. "Listen, kid, I get that you think your little family has some claim to this place, but we have an agreement. So, I'd suggest you stop making a fuss before this gets embarrassing for you." There was something about the sheer arrogance in her voice, the way she spoke as if she had some untouchable authority over a place that wasn't hers, that sent my blood boiling. But before I could get another word out, one of her kids let out a whoop and hurled a glass bottle into the lake. The loud splash rang out, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I snapped my gaze back to Karen. "Are you serious?" "What?" she said innocently, inspecting her nails. "You let your kid throw garbage in the lake." She shrugged. "It's just one bottle. Water washes things away." That was it. I took a step forward, but Mason, my best friend, put a hand on my shoulder. "Not worth it, dude," he muttered, though I could see the fire in his eyes too. Greg stepped closer, his smirk widening. "Why don't you call the owner, huh? Go ahead. I'd love to see how that plays out." Karen giggled beside him. "Yes, let's settle this properly." I didn't hesitate. Pulling out my phone, I dialed my dad. The line rang once, then twice before he picked up. "Hey, son, what's up?" I kept my eyes locked on Karen and Greg as I spoke. "Dad, are you expecting guests at the lake?" There was a pause. "What? No. Why?" I let out a breath, my grip tightening around the phone. "Because there's a woman and her family here right now, claiming they have an agreement with the owner. They're acting like they own the place. Another silence. Then my dad's voice, now edged with irritation. I'll be there in 10 minutes. I lowered the phone, staring at Karen. You might want to get comfortable, I said, my voice low, because this is about to get real interesting. Karen waved a dismissive hand. Oh, honey, we'll see about that. She had no idea what was coming. The police arrived just as the tension in the air became unbearable. Their squad car rolled to a stop near the lake's edge, and 2 officers stepped out, their eyes scanning the scene with the weariness of men who had seen one too many petty disputes. Karen wasted no time. The moment she saw them, she switched into full performance mode, staggering toward them as if she had just been rescued from some life-threatening ordeal. Officers! Thank God you're here, she wailed, clutching her chest dramatically. This man is harassing my family and trying to force us off the property that we have every right to be on. She turned, pointing an accusatory finger at me, her face twisted into an exaggerated display of distress. He's been threatening us, yelling, being completely unreasonable. I stood there, arms crossed, watching in disbelief as she spun her web of lies. Lily let out a scoff beside me, and Mason muttered under his breath, unbelievable. The officers, clearly unimpressed by Karen's theatrics, exchanged a glance before turning to me. Sir, can you explain what's going on here? One of them asked in a neutral tone, his notepad already in hand. I took a deep breath, doing my best to keep my frustration in check. Yeah, I can. My family owns this land. We've had it for decades. These people showed up uninvited, set up camp on our dock, and when I asked them to leave, they refused. Now they're claiming they have some agreement with the real owner, even though that's complete nonsense. I gestured toward the lake, where Karen's kids were still wreaking havoc, throwing sticks into the water and laughing without a care in the world. And as you can see, they're treating the place like a public park. Karen gasped dramatically. That is not true. We were simply enjoying the lake, which is a natural resource that should be open to everyone. And this man... She jabbed a finger toward me again, her voice dripping with condescension, is trying to intimidate us out of it. Her husband, Greg, who had been standing silently until now, finally stepped forward, his hands tucked into the pockets of his khaki shorts. Look, officer, I don't see why this is such a big deal. We've been coming here for weeks. The previous owner never had a problem with it. So what if this guy doesn't like it? Maybe he should take it up with the real owner, instead of wasting your time. The smugness in his voice made my fists clench at my sides, but I forced myself to stay calm. One of the officers, a stocky man with a graying beard, studied us both before flipping his notepad shut. All right, let's clear something up right now. Do you have proof of ownership? Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the scanned documents of the property deed my dad had sent me years ago. I held it up for the officer to see. He took the phone, examining it carefully, nodding as he read. Everything seems in order, he muttered before handing it back to me. Then he turned to Karen and Greg, his expression unreadable. And you? Do you have any proof of the so-called agreement you have? Karen's smug expression faltered for just a fraction of a second before she quickly masked it with faux indignation. Well, no, not physically. But I know the real owner, and he wouldn't mind us being here. The officer sighed, rubbing his temple. Ma'am, without any proof of that, you're trespassing on private property. You need to leave. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her confidence cracked as reality set in, but Greg wasn't ready to back down. Now hold on a second, he said, stepping in closer. You're really going to take their word for it? This could be some kind of scam. People fake documents all the time. The officer's patience was clearly running thin. Sir, unless you can provide any legitimate paperwork proving your claim, you're not in the right here. I suggest you pack up and leave before this turns into something more serious. Karen's face contorted into something between rage and desperation. This is ridiculous. We are good, tax-paying citizens. We have rights. She turned to the officers with pleading eyes. You can't seriously be taking his side over ours. But it was clear by now that the police weren't buying her act. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse for Karen and Greg, the sound of an approaching car cut through the tension. A sleek black SUV rolled onto the gravel road leading to the lake, coming to a slow, deliberate stop. The driver's side door opened and my father stepped out. He was a man of quiet authority, with a presence that commanded attention without needing to raise his voice. He adjusted his sunglasses, took one long look at the scene before him, and let out a sigh. Someone want to tell me what's going on here? Karen's bravado cracked like thin ice beneath a heavy boot. She blinked in rapid succession, clearly thrown off by his arrival. Greg, ever the smooth talker, straightened his posture and extended a hand. Ah, you must be the owner. Glad you're here. There seems to be some confusion about our access to the lake. My father didn't take his hand. Instead, he glanced at me, then at the officers, and finally at the mess Karen's family had made. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the tense silence. Confusion? He looked directly at Karen, because from where I'm standing, it looks pretty clear. You're trespassing on my land, Karen sputtered, her face turning a deep shade of red. Why your land? She let out a nervous laugh, attempting to regain her composure. Oh, I see what's happening here. This is a misunderstanding. You see, I was under the impression that we had permission. My father tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. From whom? Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. She glanced at Greg, who had suddenly found something very interesting to look at on the ground. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of their crumbling lie. Finally, my father turned to the officers. I trust you'll handle this accordingly? The bearded officer nodded. Yes, sir. We were just about to remove them. Karen's carefully crafted illusion had shattered. She looked from my father to the officers, then back to Greg, as if waiting for someone to pull a last-minute miracle out of thin air. But there was none. The game was over. Her only options were to leave quietly or be escorted off in front of her own kids. For the first time since she'd arrived, Karen had nothing to say. Karen's silence didn't last long. The moment the officers took a step toward her, her outrage reignited, and she threw her arms up dramatically. This is absurd. You're just going to take his word for it. Where's the proof? Where's the real documentation? Her voice climbed in pitch, a desperate screech as she turned to the officers, then back to my father, as if waiting for someone to finally hand her the victory she thought she deserved. My father, ever the composed man, simply pulled a leather folder from the inside of his SUV, opened it, and handed the official deed to the officer without a single word. The officer barely glanced at it before nodding, confirming that what I had already shown on my phone was legitimate. He turned to Karen, his tone no longer neutral but firm. Ma'am, this document proves that the land and lake access belong to Mr. Reynolds and his family. You are trespassing, and you need to leave immediately. Karen's mouth opened, then shut again. For the first time, real panic flickered in her eyes, her entitled delusions hitting a wall of cold, undeniable reality. Greg, ever the arrogant businessman, let out a dry chuckle and stepped forward, his expression smug despite the clear writing on the wall. All right, let's cut the theatrics. How much do you want? My father turned to him slowly, as if he hadn't quite heard him right. Excuse me? Greg smirked, pulling his wallet from his pocket and casually thumbing through a thick stack of $100 bills. Come on. We're all reasonable people here. I don't know what kind of sentimental attachment you have to this place, but let's be honest, money talks. You name a price, and we walk away happy. No hard feelings. I could feel the temperature drop, even though the sun still hung high in the sky. My father remained eerily silent for a moment, staring at Greg in a way that made even the officers shift uncomfortably. Finally, he spoke, his voice dangerously calm. You think you can buy my land? that I'd sell even an inch of this place to a man who just barged onto it without a shred of respect. Greg, oblivious to the warning signs in my father's voice, let out another condescending laugh. Everyone has a price. Be smart, old man. Don't let pride get in the way of a good deal. I had seen my father angry before, but this was different. This wasn't the kind of anger that exploded. It was the kind that simmered, that turned into something far more dangerous. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, and for the first time, I saw real hesitation flicker in Greg's eyes. "Let me make something very clear," my father said, his voice low but carrying the weight of every unspoken threat behind it. "This land is my legacy. It's been in my family for generations. No amount of money will change that. And the fact that you think you can buy your way out of trespassing, out of disrespecting my family, tells me everything I need to know about you." Greg's smirk wavered, but he recovered quickly, slipping the money back into his wallet with an exaggerated sigh. "Fine. If you don't want to do this the easy way, we can always go the legal route. I've got connections. One phone call, and I'll have a team of lawyers making your life miserable." I let out a short laugh, unable to contain myself. "Yeah? And what are you going to sue us for?" "Owning our own land." Karen, seeing her husband faltering, stepped forward, eyes blazing with desperation. "You don't understand who you're messing with. We know people in high places. We can make your life hell. Do you really want to deal with that over a stupid lake?" My father simply shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips, though there was no amusement in his eyes. "You still don't get it, do you? You're standing here, throwing empty threats, acting like you have some kind of power. But the truth is, you're just two entitled people who thought they could walk onto someone else's land and take whatever they wanted. And now that you're being held accountable, you're scrambling." Greg's face darkened, his usual smugness cracking under the weight of his bruised ego. "You'll regret this," he muttered under his breath, stepping back toward his wife. Karen, on the other hand, had lost all pretense of composure. "This isn't over. You'll see. We'll be back with proof. With the real owner. You're going to look so stupid when the truth comes out." She was practically foaming at the mouth, but it was all just noise now. Everyone knew it. Even the officers looked exhausted. "You've got 5 minutes to pack your things and leave," one of the officers finally said, his patience clearly gone. "Or we'll escort you out ourselves." For a moment, I thought Karen might actually fight it, but the reality of the situation was sinking in. She looked around, realizing that everyone was against her, that there was no last-minute save coming, no secret deal that would miraculously make this lake hers. Her shoulders sagged, her face twisted in defeat, and with a sharp glare in my direction, she spun on her heel and stomped toward her things. Greg followed, his anger simmering beneath the surface, but he knew there was nothing more he could do. As they gathered their belongings, Karen's kids whined, complaining that they weren't ready to leave. "Mom, but we just got here. This is so unfair." Karen turned sharply, her face still burning with humiliation. "Get in the car," she snapped, her voice cutting through the air like a whip. Her kids, now realizing that the fun was truly over, slumped their shoulders and trudged toward their parents' vehicle. I stood with my father, watching as they threw their things into the trunk with furious movements, muttering to each other in hushed tones. Greg shot us one last glare before yanking open the driver's side door. "This isn't the last you've heard from us," he spat, slamming the door behind him. Karen, however, wasn't quite finished. She rolled down the window, her face twisted with rage and embarrassment. "Enjoy your stupid lake while you can," she sneered. "One day, people like you won't be able to hoard all the nice things. You'll see." And with that, she rolled the window up and Greg hit the gas, their car kicking up gravel as they sped away down the dirt road. The silence they left behind was almost laughable. Mason let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "That was something," Lily sighed, crossing her arms. "People like that never learn, do they?" My father exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally easing as he turned to me. "You did good, son." I nodded, watching as the dust settled in the wake of their departure. The lake was ours again, and as the sun began to set, casting golden light over the water, I knew one thing for certain. No one, no matter how entitled, would ever take this place from us. The dust had barely settled from Karen and Greg's departure when my father let out a long breath, shaking his head as he watched their car disappear down the road. The silence they left behind was heavy, not with regret or second-guessing, but with the sheer exhaustion of dealing with people so delusional that they had truly believed they could walk onto someone else's property and claim it as their own. The officers lingered a moment longer, one of them jotting down some final notes before tucking his notepad away. "If they come back, give us a call," the older one said, his voice edged with irritation. "People like that don't usually take no for an answer the first time." My father nodded, but there was no doubt in my mind that Karen wouldn't be returning. Not because she had learned her lesson, but because she had lost, and people like her couldn't stand to face their own failures. They ran from them, buried them under layers of self-delusion, and convinced themselves that the world had somehow wronged them instead of accepting that they had simply been in the wrong. Lily let out a short laugh, running a hand through her hair as she turned to me. "That was ridiculous," she muttered, shaking her head. "I mean, I knew people could be entitled, but that was next-level delusional." Mason stretched his arms, glancing toward the lake, which now sat calm and undisturbed again, as if it had been waiting for those intruders to leave. "I'll tell you one thing," he said, smirking. "We should have charged admission for that. Front row seats to the greatest Karen meltdown of the century. I could have made a killing." My father chuckled at that, the tension in his posture finally unwinding as he stepped forward and placed a hand on my shoulder. "You handled yourself well," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "A lot of people would have lost their temper in a situation like that. You kept your head." I exhaled, realizing just how much I had been holding in throughout the entire confrontation. "Yeah, well," I muttered, kicking at a loose rock on the dock. "It wasn't easy." We spent the next hour cleaning up the mess Karen's family had left behind. Empty snack wrappers, beer bottles, a couple of broken plastic cups. Nothing surprising, just evidence of the kind of people they were. My father didn't say much as we worked, but I knew him well enough to know that he was still thinking about it, still turning the whole thing over in his mind. He had always been the kind of man who believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but he also wasn't naive. He had dealt with entitled people before, though maybe not on this scale. As we gathered the last of the trash into a garbage bag, Lily let out a sigh, tying it up before tossing it into the bin near the cabin. "I don't get it," she said, shaking her head. "What goes through someone's mind that makes them think they can just walk onto private property and claim it? Like, what kind of reality are they living in?" My father dusted off his hands, staring out at the lake, the water shimmering under the setting sun. "Entitlement," he finally said, his voice calm but firm. "Some people go through life thinking that the rules don't apply to them, that the world owes them something just because they exist. And when they don't get what they want, they lash out. They don't understand accountability, because they've never had to face it before." I knew he was right. Karen and Greg had probably bulldozed their way through life, always expecting to get what they wanted by demanding it loudly enough, by throwing tantrums or flashing money at the problem until it disappeared. But this time, they had hit a wall. They had run into people who weren't intimidated by their arrogance, who wouldn't bend just to make them go away, and that had shaken them. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden hues across the lake, I sat down on the edge of the dock, letting my feet dangle just above the water. The cool breeze carried the distant sounds of birds calling to one another, the rustling of trees lining the shore, the soft lapping of water against the wooden beams. Peace. The kind of peace that Karen had tried to steal from us, but had ultimately failed to. My father sat down beside me, hands resting on his knees. "Proud of you, son," he said after a long pause. I turned to him, a little surprised. For what? He gave me a small smile, the kind that spoke volumes without needing many words. For standing your ground, for not letting people like that push you around. A lot of folks would have just let it happen, just to avoid the hassle. I thought about that, about how easy it would have been to just walk away, to let Karen and Greg have their way simply because dealing with them had been exhausting. But that wasn't how the world worked. You didn't just let people trample over you because it was easier. You fought for what was yours. You stood up for what was right, no matter how loud or aggressive the other side got. Yeah, I said, staring out at the water, watching as the ripples spread out, endless and unbothered. I guess I just didn't want to let them win. My father nodded, his gaze steady. And you didn't. Lily plopped down beside us, nudging my shoulder. Next time, though, she said with a grin. Can we at least charge them for the entertainment? I feel like we missed out on a business opportunity here. Mason, who had been standing nearby, burst out laughing. Now there's an idea. Live Karen meltdown, tickets only. My father chuckled, shaking his head. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that there will always be another Karen. He exhaled, standing up and stretching. And next time, we'll be just as ready. I watched as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, the lake reflecting it like a mirror. No matter how many entitled people came and went, no matter how many tried to take what wasn't theirs, this place would always belong to us. Not just because of a piece of paper or a legal deed, but because it was more than land. It was history. It was family. And no one, no amount of arrogance, no level of entitlement could ever take that away from us.